What's up, everyone? My name is Ethan. Welcome to Splash City. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe. Did you know that 95% of the people who watch this channel are not subscribed? That's a really high number. I'd like to get that one down. So if you have been around for a while, you watch this channel regularly, please consider hitting that button down below. It would really help me out a lot. And with that out of the way, let's get in with today's video. Today we're talking about the Philadelphia 76ers, continuing along with our offseason breakdown series. This could be a big offseason for them. Obviously, the Ben Simmons rumors are flying right now. They're going to continue to for the next couple of weeks. Eventually, if he does get moved this offseason, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he stays on the team. I have no idea. Daryl Morey, he keeps things close to the vest, so we don't know what he's going to do. But it's year two now of him being in charge of the team, and Morey is a guy who's definitely not afraid to make a big splash move. So there could very well be some huge trades coming to Philadelphia this offseason, especially after the way their postseason ended for the second year in a row very prematurely. So let's talk about it. So the Sixers were, this season, they had the best record in the Eastern Conference. They were the #1 seed for the entire year, and they were, battling with the Nets for a little bit, but ultimately came out on top there and secured home court advantage throughout the entire Eastern Conference playoffs. And then they lose to a Hawks team that nobody expected to be in the position that they were in, right? The Hawks were able to, not only beat the Knicks and advance, go to the second round against Philadelphia, but then, they were able to push that one and be able to come out on top in a Game 7 in Philadelphia there. So, huge victory for the Atlanta Hawks there, and then obviously they go to the conference finals, and the Sixers are left at home, wondering what just happened, because they were, like I said, 1 seed all season long, and ultimately they lose to a team that nobody really expected to be there. So pretty disappointing finish to the year for them, given the high expectations and the way that they played all regular season long, especially, with Joel Embiid having a top MVP finish. He was top 3 in MVP voting this year. Ben Simmons, he was top 3 in Defensive Player of the Year voting, despite some struggles in the playoffs, but he was high up there in award conversations. They both made the All-Star team, and then you got a lot of really good role players. You made some decent moves last offseason to bring in a guy like Seth Curry. You bring in George Hill at the deadline, and this team looks like they're really ready to make a run, but ultimately it just doesn't really come together in the playoffs, and they end up losing in a very disappointing fashion. So definitely, I would not say that this year was a success for Philly, given everything that went into this. It was still a good season. Like I said, they were the 1 seed, and they were able to, have some fun times and some expectations for them throughout the year. But because of the disappointment in the way it ended, I don't think anybody really feels good about the direction of this team and what they did this past year. So let's look at this cap sheet. Obviously, you have these 3 players at the top of the roster who are making big money. You have Tobias Harris, Joel Embiid, and Ben Simmons, all on, max or near max contracts for the next couple of seasons, right? Tobias Harris, a lot of people are going to, call him overpaid, of course, given that he is not an all-star. He's a borderline all-star type guy, but right, he's not made an all-star team, and then he's making $36 million a season, and he's, the 3rd best player on this team. At points, he's not even the 3rd best player. He's a little bit inconsistent, so I get the gripes with Tobias Harris and the contract they paid him, especially choosing him over Jimmy Butler. It feels like a mistake in hindsight. But he did have a solid season this year. He is overpaid, but he did actually have a pretty good year. And I thought that he, played a good role for this team, and I don't necessarily think they need to move him in order to be extremely successful. Now, if you can, use that money maybe for a real All-NBA type player, then yes, definitely that would be, a better allocation of their resources there. But I just don't know if there's a trade out there for Tobias Harris without giving up a bazillion draft picks, and so maybe they do that. You attach Tobias Harris with a bunch of picks and potentially get somebody else in there, but nobody really wants to take on that contract, and I don't think he's necessarily the problem with this team as currently constructed, so I don't necessarily know that a trade for Tobias Harris is going to be super necessary this offseason. If you get a good offer, of course, then I would bite on that, but I don't think they need to be out there aggressively shopping him. Joel Embiid only has 2 years left on that contract. It's getting closer to expiration, and we're getting to the point where if things aren't going well in Philadelphia, he could very easily be asking for a trade here sooner rather than later. Given the fact that, he's 27 years old, he has a history of injury, how many more years are we going to get of productive Joel Embiid? I know that he's, right now in the physical prime of his career, but a big guy like that with a history of knee issues, things could end for him at any point, and so obviously you don't want that to happen, but that's something you are worried about if you are the Sixers and if you're Joel Embiid. So for him, he might feel like, hey, I only have a couple of years left of being really at the peak of my powers, 3-4 years left, and I need to, get to a team that can really have me a chance at a ring right now. So maybe he asks for a trade, if things aren't going well, with only the 2 years left on his contract, he could kind of weasel his way to whatever particular team he wants to go for by giving the teams a list and saying, hey, I'm not going to play for this team and this team and this team, trade me here. So we are almost getting to that point. I don't think it's going to happen this offseason. If I had to place a bet, I think it'll probably be more likely, next offseason, entering the final year of that contract, if, again, things have not gone well for the previous year. But I do think that we're getting closer to the point where Embiid may consider requesting out of Philadelphia if things are not up to his standards. And with only 2 years left on that contract, we are getting close to that point. And so the move that probably has to happen in order to shake things up around Embiid and try to deliver a contender this year is probably a Ben Simmons trade. And that's going to be a talking point for a lot of people over the next few weeks. And I think it makes sense, given the struggles that he just had in the playoffs. And he is still young, but the fit between Simmons and Embiid is questionable, and we've been talking about that for the last couple of years, whether or not those two guys can play together. And given the way that things have gone for them over the past few years, you can say that probably the answer is no. I don't know if they can. They can play together in the regular season and have moderate success in the playoffs. But if you're talking about winning a title, you might have to move one or the other in order to really maximize what this team can be. And Simmons is probably the guy, given that Embiid is pretty clearly the better player at this point. I know people were kind of debating that last year, but Embiid's coming off a top 3 MVP finish, and Ben Simmons is coming off breaking free throws and shooting his team out of the playoffs. So I think we've settled that debate now. Embiid should be the keeper. I know that he has less years on his contract, so it's a little more risky to hold on to him, and given his injury history, of course, there is also that risk factor as well. But Ben Simmons is he feels like the odd man out here. So if they are going to make a trade, what are the options? Well, I'm sure there's a lot of teams out there that would be interested in a guy like Ben Simmons. I know we're going to hear a lot about Portland, I think, over the coming weeks, given that they also have a trade that they need to make, to keep Damian Lillard happy. Pretty similar situation between these two teams, and I think a CJ McCollum for Ben Simmons swap would work out nicely for both sides. I think if I'm Philadelphia, you ask for Portland to throw in a little bit more along with McCollum to make that work, whether that's future picks or some players on the roster that you feel like would fit here. I think that one would be something that I would take a look at if I was Portland and if I was Philly. I think Simmons for McCollum is one that does make sense there. If you want to just trade him for draft assets and then maybe flip those along with another player for something else, there's plenty of teams out there with draft capital that they can throw you. The Golden State Warriors have been a rumored one. I've heard the Houston Rockets, although I don't know if that's particularly enticing there for Philly here. So there's a couple teams out there that I'm sure would be interested. It's just a matter of what does Philly want back, and do they feel like the value is high enough to pull the trigger on a trade right now, given that Simmons' value is probably lower than it ever has been. And if he plays well this season, maybe he could raise that up and you trade him either at the deadline or next offseason. But then you're risking the thing with Joel Embiid. So lots of questions there, but that's going to be a major talking point for the Sixers over the coming weeks. Okay, now let's move on and talk about the rest of the roster really quickly. Danny Green is entering free agency. I could see him, getting a mid-level somewhere, whether that's the full mid-level with Philly or somewhere else, or maybe he, signs to a team with cap space. I have no idea. He could re-sign with Philadelphia. They could always bring him back for a higher number than anybody else wants to pay him, although I don't know if it's worth that for Danny Green, given that he's 34 and is a streaky shooter at this point in his career. And I know that he's kind of come out in interviews over the past little while and kind of talked about what went wrong with Philadelphia this year, and he's kind of talked about how he's been dissatisfied with the way that things went this year for him, so I would not be surprised to see him on a different team next year. George Hill is non-guaranteed for around $10 million next season. I would probably bring him back for that. I think George Hill didn't get much of a chance to play with them, given that he was brought in at the deadline, but I thought he was solid for them the second half of this year. Veteran point guard, he's been on a lot of different really good basketball teams over his time in the NBA. For the past 5, 6, 7 years, he's kind of been bouncing around to a lot of contenders around the league, and I do think that he's a good fit with Philly, so I'd probably keep him on that non-guaranteed. He's also a potential trade guy. You package him with other things to make up the money, whether that's Seth Curry, although I'd hold on to him. Maybe, Matisse Thybulle, Tyrese Maxey, Shake Milton. All those guys could potentially be thrown into a trade if you really want to make a swing for the fences move. George Hill would be the matching salary that would go out, given that the Danny Green contract is expiring. So we'll see on that one. Seth Curry, just like I just said, I wouldn't trade Seth Curry. He's making around $8 million a season. I think he's more than worth it. I talked about this this last offseason, but when they made the Seth Curry for Josh Richardson move, I loved it for Philly and I hated it for Dallas. I feel even more strongly about that now. I think pretty much everybody would agree with me on this, that Philly made a home run trade for Seth Curry. He fits extremely well with what they do. The floor spacing that he provides is extremely valuable. And so I really like him on this team, and I would hold on to him if I was Philly. I understand if you have to make, a matching salary, if you're, really trading for like an all-star level player or something like that. But as far as role players go, Seth is one of the best in the league, in my opinion. Mike Scott is a free agent. I'd let him walk. I'm not too worried about a guy like Mike Scott. He's 33 years old. He was okay. He's kind of fallen out of the rotation this past year and wasn't that good for them. If he wants to come back on a minimum, maybe, but at this point, I think I would let Mike Scott walk away. Matisse Thybulle and Tyrese Maxey, Shake Milton, I'll lump all those guys in here. Young, talented players, all of them entering the third season, or no, excuse me, Tyrese Maxey's only entering his second season, but Thybulle and Milton are both entering the third season of their rookie contracts. I would expect, all of them to contribute on this team if they do remain with Philly next year, but there could be a trade in the works for any of these guys. This is their major assets. They have them plus future picks, so if you have to throw them in to really make a splash move, whether that's attached to Tobias Harris or attached to Ben Simmons or to George Hill, Seth Curry, whoever, you're attaching these young guys in those trades in order to, not only make up money, but to make up the difference in assets there. If the Sixers are going to try to bring in somebody, and like I said, we know Daryl Morey's not scared, so they're going to be aggressive out there this offseason, and if it's not a Ben Simmons move, then I would expect at least one or two of those younger guys to be potentially thrown into a trade. I know they're all young and talented and, can provide sparks to this team when they need them already, even though they're still young in their NBA career, but if you can trade for like an all-star level player, then those would be the guys that would be included. Dwight Howard is an interesting one. He did not have as good of a season this year with Philly as he did with the Lakers last year. He was really, really good for what the Lakers needed and what he provided for them. It was a good, partnership between team and player there. I did not like the fit as much with the Sixers. I playing Joel Embiid's backup, and I just don't know if he really fit with their style of play as much as he did with the Lakers last year. So I wouldn't be shocked to see him go to a different team, potentially even back to the Lakers for his third stint with that team. I think there are some other teams out there that could be in need of a backup center of the caliber of Dwight Howard. So I do expect that he will stick around another year in the league, although I don't know if it's with Philly. I'm leaning towards probably not. I'm leaning towards that he's going to leave, but we'll have to see on that one. Let's skip down. Furkan Korkmaz is going to be a free agent this offseason. Good shooter, good floor spacer. I would bring him back given the spacing that he provides, and he's one of the only, one of the few really, really good elite level shooters on this team. Him and Curry and Danny Green at points, I guess. But Korkmaz, he is a little bit streaky, and he's 23 years old, but I do think that he provides the floor spacing that you need, so I'd probably try to re-sign him. And then you have Isaiah Joe and Paul Rudd, who are both, younger players, potential assets in a trade. Isaiah Joe's is guaranteed for next year, but non-guaranteed for the third, and then Paul Reed's is non-guaranteed for both. So, realistically, either one of them could be cut next season if they feel like they need to add more veterans, or, either could be thrown into a trade, along with some of the other younger players on this roster. Obviously, their value is not as high as a guy like Milton, Maxey, or Thybulle, but they do still maybe provide a little bit, the same value as like a second-round pick. They're okay players. Anthony Tolliver, 36 years old, played for 1 million teams. Would not be surprised to see him retire this offseason. If I'm Philly, I'm not even thinking twice about Anthony Tolliver. He's not at all relevant to what this team plans for the future, and I just don't feel like I'd even consider bringing him back for a 1-year deal. He's okay, he's a solid veteran, but he really didn't do much when he was there this year, and so I just don't think it's worth it. Gary Clark and Rajon Tucker both on 2-way contracts. I actually like what both of those guys provide, to be honest. I've seen Rajon Tucker play a little bit, and I like him as a younger asset, and as well as Gary Clark, has been on a couple of different teams, but it's clear that he can play in the NBA. He's not going to be amazing, but I do think he can potentially have a rotation spot, so I think both of those guys would maybe be worth taking a look at to sign to the full roster or bring back on 2-way contracts. So if you ask me, the plan for the Sixers should be look around for a Ben Simmons trade. I think it's time to make that move. Normally, I'm not one to, advise teams to make a really rash decision, like a big, franchise-altering decision while they're still, trying to be a contender. But I do think that it is time for this one to happen. It's been a couple of years now, and they've, it's been made clear that this pairing is likely not going to result in an NBA title. I know that the league feels pretty wide open right now, and and the things that went wrong last year could be correctable, you know, with another year under your belt and some more experience and some shuffling around the margins. But I think it's probably time to look at a move for Ben Simmons. It just feels like, you know, the coaching staff and the rest of the team is kind of fed up with him at this point, and his you know, he's not been willing to try to improve his jump shooting at all. His free throw numbers are horrendous. He still doesn't shoot jumpers. You know, he's gotten a little bit better since his rookie year, but he really has not shown much improvement at all in that regard. So if I'm Philadelphia, I'm looking around for the best possible Ben Simmons offer, and just taking that and moving along, because I know that his value might be a little bit lower right now, but I think it's just time to make that move. You have to keep Joel Embiid happy. You have to just try to go out there and do what you can. But I think that's about all I have on the Philadelphia 76ers. Like I said at the top of the video, if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, ring the bell if you want to. Leave a comment letting me know what you guys think about the Sixers and their offseason plans. Are they going to trade Ben Simmons? Who are they going to trade him to? Would love to hear your thoughts about that in the comments below. But with all that said, I will see you guys in the next one.